Evening, everyone. It's almost 7 p.m. Probably may have a few other folks joining, but good to see each of you tonight. I think it's going to hit the top of the hour here and should be just a few seconds. So it is 7 p.m. and thank you for joining us again tonight. Tonight we'll be covering the 6 of 7 C's, and Brendon Doerstling will be leading the study and prayer time tonight on Christian education. And one of the things I know we've asked him to do, possibly give us an update on Beth Eden Christian School. I know he's involved very closely with them, and there's certainly need for prayer. So at this time, I will just turn it over to Brendon.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Can hear you.
Okay. So Pastor asked me to talk a little bit about this evening to introduce this session about Christian education. Now, I'm not a big educator. I'm not very knowledgeable on that. I'm coming from it more from the consumer side, I guess, that having my kids in the Christian school. And certainly for me, a focus right now is of course, the ministry there at Beth Eden, the Christian school they have there. But of course, Christian education encompasses a lot more. Won't be talking about our Christian colleges today, even though certainly during the prayer time, I would hope that we would also be praying for those and whatever other schools people are attending. The homeschooling is also in some way Christian education if the parents are Christian. Again, I won't be talking so much about that. I really wanted to focus a little bit on the needs of Beth Eden. But we have a lot of options nowadays as to how to educate our kids. Obviously, the public schools have been around for a long time. We have charter schools, we have secular private schools, online programs, and of course, for Christians, we have the Christian private school, the homeschool, and just maybe some other combinations of things that you can choose from. And so as Christian parents, we all make our own decisions as to what we think is the best for our children. And I just wanted to share a couple reasons why we chose to go with Beth Eden, first of all. So I was really looking for a school where the instruction would come from a biblical worldview. Everybody's very familiar with the verse in Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. So, in any school setting, curriculum and teachers, they're not necessarily neutral. And we talked about, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but nowadays, everything is taught from a particular perspective. And so in public schools, that will be a secular perspective, a lot of times humanistic perspective. I understand sometimes there are Christian teachers there in the public schools, but in general, the training will be from a perspective that doesn't necessarily support what we're trying to achieve in our homes, and that is raising our children up in a godly fashion. So to me, instruction from a biblical worldview was really critical to be able to have that. Also, another reason is just the influence of the teachers and also the peers. But first, let's talk about the teachers. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise." So, Christian school teachers are a special breed. They don't make a lot of money. They're not in it for the money, obviously, but they're really motivated by trying to impact kids for Christ and largely. And so, again, just allowing our kids to walk together with those who have biblical knowledge, who see things from a biblical perspective, I think is really important. And then also, when it comes to the peers, now obviously you can have bad eggs in any environment, public setting, a Christian school setting, and that can happen. But hopefully at Christian schools, you'd be able to find more like-minded young folks and have that influence on each other. They could be encouraging each other to be more like Christ in that type of a setting, whereas in a public school setting might be a little bit more faced with antagonism from those who are not believers. So the influence of the godly teachers and the peers. With the peers, it's I think of 1 Corinthians 15:33, be not deceived. Bad company ruins good morals is what I have in this from this translation. And so, just hanging around with the wrong folks can also have that negative impact on our children. The third point here I have is inclusion of spiritual training. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so public schools fill kids' heads with a lot of knowledge, and a lot of times that will lead to pride and being puffed up. Hopefully, the Christian schools would not just fill kids' with heads with knowledge, but also fill their hearts with a spiritual understanding, and that would hopefully lead them to a more dependence on God rather than pride. So, I think this holistic approach of whether addressing both the actual knowledge of just the basic things that people need to know in order to be successful in society, but then also added to that the whole spiritual teaching as well. And so it really helps to support parents in their efforts to mold their kids to really be godly individuals. And then I have here also that it provides an environment of safety. And to me, this is an important one, especially nowadays. Obviously, we had a terrible situation earlier this week with the shooting. Not really necessarily talking about an absence of violence. I am afraid that someday some random person will also just attack a Christian school. But really talking about the safety really from a lot of these influences that can lead our children astray. So it's that kind of this emotional safety. Colossians 2:8 says, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elements and spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. And so we see a lot of young folks who grow up in a Christian home, grow up in church even sometimes, are then later on led astray. And a lot of times, there's a lot of influences that come into play, but just that constant drip, drip, drip of just questioning whether creation is really true, questioning whether the Bible is really true, questioning whether biblical morals are really good and healthy. So all these things eventually undermine, I think, faith that people have that they've grown up in. So my own personal experience is that I've actually seen both sides growing up. I was first schooled in a Christian school from K4 through 5th grade, and so I was very much in that environment and felt very comfortable there. And as my parents went to Germany as missionaries, then I suddenly found myself in a public school. It was a conservative Catholic area, but still very worldly environment suddenly, and I still remember within a few weeks having a field trip, and on the bus they were playing, some of the popular music of the day in the late 70s. And what was really, really disturbing to me is, just being able to understand the words, as many of my German fellow students couldn't in 6th grade, was this song that was just blaring that one of their favorites was Highway to Hell. And it just really, really impacted me, just that I felt very uncomfortable in that environment. And then all the other things that went along with it, you're dealing with classmates who starting to mess around with being sexually active, or just in middle and high school, then alcohol plays a big role with the kids, and in Germany at least. And so there was a lot of that influence. And, of course, here in our country, then the drugs and whatever else on top of that. And not to forget, I was in Germany, since it's a state church system, the schools do have religion class that kids have to attend. So the Catholics go to one class, the Lutherans go to another. Those are the two state churches. Everything else is not officially sanctioned by the government. And so I had to then end up going to an ethics class. And even there, it was just I had one teacher one year who was just way off the mark. I mean, it was dabbling in all the paranormal things and was trying to promote the virtues of astrology and all these things, and was just a really weird dude with his philosophies and what he believed in. And so you have all those influences, of course. And then, later on, I came back to the States, went to Bob Jones for several years to get my undergraduate. And then again, so back in the Christian environment. And then right after that, then going to grad school, back into a very secular environment again. Quite shocking having to share an office with the head of the LGBT. There wasn't any Q at that time, group, and so being challenged there as well to stand. And so obviously having had that background already with being in a Christian school, growing up in a Christian home, was able to meet those challenges. But just shouldn't underestimate, I believe, that just the impact of the environment, especially just how the schools have become so hostile towards the Bible and towards Christianity, just how difficult that can be for our children. So those are the reasons then that I decided to enroll our kids in Beth Eden Baptist School. Now again, I realize there are lots of other options, and I will just for tonight focus on that school because that's where we're at as a family, and that's also where there are a lot of needs. And so I want to share some of those headwinds that they're facing. So especially in this area, so one of the problems is that just the student numbers are going down in Christian schools, especially in Beth Eden, and it has several reasons for that. But one of them is just simply economics, that a lot of young families just can't afford to live in this area anymore just because of the rapidly rising cost of living here in the Front Range. And so many of them are moving away. So that's an issue. Also, over the past few years, there's been a little bit of a issue with good, solid leadership. They had good administrator and Ed Francis up to, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And then, they've had people filling in very effectively from the faculty, but still sort of missing that one administrator, the leadership that's really needed to kind of, I think, really bring that school forward. And so that's something that has also been an issue that's been a headwind for them. And then, of course, the past few years has been very, very difficult to operate with the whole pandemic situation. I think they mastered the first year very well with online training options and things, and it actually was, I think, went fairly smoothly considering all the difficulties. And then last year they were preparing to move forward with going back full time in the classroom. Mask mandates had gone away, and then it was basically within 48 hours of starting the school, the Jefferson County Health Board decided to reinstate a health mandate, the mask mandate, sorry. And so that just caused a huge problem, just because there's a lot of strong feelings in conservative circles about those issues. And so when the school at first did not comply, then of course there was a lawsuit, and it seems to be something that was sort of a little bit targeted towards Christian schools. I mean, there were lots of schools that didn't comply, charter schools and others, but the only 3 schools that were sued by the county health board were Christian schools. And so maybe a little bit of an agenda behind there trying to really make it difficult for Christian schools to operate. But by God's grace, able to make it through the school year in spite of that, and then also just had some challenges with an administrator that was hired for a short period of time and then was let go. And so those challenges are still there. And personally, I feel like where we are right now with Beth Eden is that we're very close to potentially losing the last Christian day school, K through 12, that is really hosted by one of our sister churches. We've had other ones, Faith Baptist up in Longmont. We've had at Red Rocks Church, the Silver State, and those have all shut down. And this is one of the ones that's left that's driving distance for most of us here. And so I am very concerned that we're sort of 1 minute before midnight here. And once we lose that last one, that's probably it for this particular area, having something that's really very close to our belief system. Now, there are other options, of course, other good schools where there are evangelicals and people that really have committed their lives to Christ. But this is really the last one that's really our sister church. So what are some specific prayer requests? I kind of already mentioned them in passing. Really need to pray for more students. Where they are right now is they really need probably another 30 to 40 more students to work effectively. It's kind of already getting late, in terms of signing students up. And so just be praying that we would have just more people interested in putting their kids in really this type of a Christian school, and would be willing to make that sacrifice, as it is obviously also financial sacrifice. They do need the new administrator. I've actually been asked to help with that search, but there's been nothing to do so far. Unfortunately, they've approached 7 individuals, and all have had reasons why they were not available. And so I think filling this position is really key to getting the school going again. So you can be praying for a new administrator. Pray for the teachers, obviously. Many of them make great sacrifices. The majority of them are coming back again next year, even with the current situation in the school. And so just pray for God's blessing on them as they work to continue to see the school operate. And it gets difficult when you have fewer and fewer students. Pray for spiritual renewal, really. So this is one of the things that Pastor Jason has mentioned to the faculty that they want to focus on in the coming years, that during the pandemic, just with all the different pressures and even just the dwindling student numbers and just having all the things to worry about, they have admittedly been a little bit lax and maybe some enforcing some of the discipline, and just really trying to focus on making it a spiritually wholesome environment. And so there are some students that probably need to be expelled just in order to get back to a really wholesome Christian environment, or a more wholesome Christian environment. And so there is that desire to return back to that, but again, it's tied to this whole issue of having the right number of students. Pray for the finances. The church there has probably been bearing some of that burden just out of the church's budget. I'm not privy to those financial details, but I would imagine that just as they have fewer students and that some of those budget pressures are such. I know in the last year they were saying they wouldn't have enough funds just based on what's coming in through the school, tuition fees or whatever, to operate for the whole school year. Now, my daughter did graduate, the school year did complete, so I don't know where those finances came from, but God provided in some way. But ultimately, for the school to be really viable, the money coming from the tuition and things is what really needs to keep the school going. And so pray for those financial needs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the school shootings and things going on, just pray for the safety of the school. It almost seems inevitable that someday some nutcase will target a Christian school for whatever reason. And so just be praying that God protects and preserves us from that type of influence. So those are a couple of my thoughts. Just keep it short here today and allow us to get to a time of prayer. And so, Skip, if you want to take over and open up those rooms, I think that'd be appropriate.
Thank you, Brendon. Thank you for that